Madam, a basic question which a large number of members have raised is with regard to NPAs and willful defaulters. Shri Premachandran said that willful defaulters should be prosecuted. If cases for prosecution under the Indian Penal Code are made out, that is to say, if there is any kind of siphoning or diversion of money and a person is declared as a willful defaulter, then certainly there are prosecutions in those cases. It is not that you can be a willful defaulter and get away with it. NPA is slightly different. NPA is a case where people have taken loans for the purposes of some activity, commercial or otherwise. There is nothing per se against taking loans from banks, so we must always distinguish it from loans which are pending, because banks giving loans is a good thing. Banks support growth by giving loans. Therefore, if loans stop coming, growth itself will stop. There is nothing wrong with loans pending, but loans will have to be serviced. That is to say, you have to pay back the interest. You have to slowly pay back the principal amount, and when a person is not able to pay back the interest after a certain period of time, say 90 days, the account becomes an NPA. An asset is performing as long as it is servicing the bank. The moment it stops servicing the banks, it becomes non-performing. Now here the banks are faced with a Hobson's choice. There could be several reasons. One reason could be what Mr. Premachandran mentioned, that somebody has siphoned off money or diverted the money, which is a criminal offense. There may be other cases where loans have been wrongly given. There are ethical questions in that. But then there can be a third category also, where loans were rightly given. They were given to good units, and for some reason the business cycle has taken an adverse turn and that particular industry gets adversely affected. At that stage, we are faced with a question. Do we paralyze the entire sector itself and result in losing thousands and lakhs of jobs as far as that sector is concerned? Obviously, the state cannot do it. The banks do not want to do it. That is not in larger public interest. So, all efforts are then made in order to ensure that these units continue to function, because if they continue to function, then workmen will get jobs, taxes will be paid, and there will be economic activity in the interest of the country. So the Reserve Bank of India keeps coming out with various circulars which empower the banks. You can have a corporate debt restructuring. You can have SDR, where some part of the debt can be converted into equity. You can bring in a strategic partner from outside and hand over the management to somebody else. Then there is a JLF mechanism by which the lenders themselves acquire a larger role, and therefore each of these instruments are applied to ensure that the units keep functioning, jobs are not lost, and at the same time the asset can also be preserved. For instance, the largest loans today really are in 4 to 5 sectors. I have said this earlier in this house also. The steel sector over the last few years has been facing a stress, and it is facing a stress in a large number of countries. The reason was low global demand because of the global slowdown, and as a part of the low global demand, it is believed that the Chinese steel was flooding these markets, including the Indian market, at prices less than production cost. When cheaper Chinese steel was coming into India, our steel mills were not being able to work to the best of their capacity. Their demand became less, accompanied by global factors, and therefore our steel companies went into red. A large number of steel industries, even some of the largest blue chip companies like Tisco, SAIL, also faced challenges. Now these are core sector industries and we cannot afford to let any one of them close down. Therefore, the best possible option has to be made in order to keep these sectors going. One of the larger solutions was that the government of the day has a responsibility with regard to policy as to how to revive that sector. So the government increased some customs duty. tried some duties on subsidies that the Chinese were giving. Finally, what seems to have worked in the last few days was that for a temporary period the government had put a minimum import price, that no steel below a certain price can get into India. The United States took a more aggressive action. They imposed various forms of anti-dumping duties, and in some cases the duties went up to 280% on the Chinese steel. UK could not do it because the European Union did not do it, and that is why we had the problem with the Tata Steel plant in the United Kingdom. These are issues which cannot be settled by securitization or by DRT. They would have to be settled by policy itself. After steel come the infrastructure projects. This was another sector where large debts were pending. Even still they are pending. The third important sector was power. In power, the cancellation of the coal blocks was coupled with low demand for power because of the global and the domestic demand being low. And then another factor came in, which I have mentioned earlier, that several state governments through their state electricity boards decided to subsidize power to certain segments of the society, some in case of farms, some in case of domestic, some in case of industrial sector. Now, under the Electricity Act of 2003, subsidy has to be paid by the state government from its own budget to the electricity companies if they want it. They did not do that. Instead, they just allowed the distribution companies to take loans from banks. So literally, when these figures of 6 lakhs and 8 lakhs were being mentioned, a very large part of this money is owed by the discoms to the banks. The discoms are neither paying back the principal amount nor the interest. So again the government has stepped in. The Ministry of Power came out with Uday scheme by which the state governments must take over the debt, issue bonds so that the debt of the power companies is reduced, and then slowly the power companies over a period of time increase their tariff so that they charge for the power that they supply. So the power sector could be revised. Sectors like national highways, sugar and other sectors were sick, and some of them have recently shown signs of revival. So the real answer is, as far as the big loans are concerned, the economic cycle itself will have to take care of a large number of them. At the same time, people are not able to service it. The banks are today putting a lot of pressure on them. We must be reading about a group with 5 or 6 units having been compelled to sell 2 of them so as to repay back the banks. So they are coming out with solutions under the RBI circulars of this kind. The third methodology is banks must also be empowered to take effective legal action against the defaulters. One of them was the insolvency law or the bankruptcy law, where a company is turning bankrupt and is unable to discharge its debts. Rather than the debts being squandered away and getting rusted, somebody has to step in and take over the asset so that if a revival is possible, the revival will take place, and if it is not possible, then the assets would be adequately distributed. From workmen downwards, everybody gets his own share as far as debts are concerned. The 2 principal laws, securitization and DRT, are also steps in that direction. As far as DRT law is concerned, we have suggested not more than 2 adjournments. The whole system is now intended to become electronic. You file your cases electronically, the replies are electronic. You try and dispose of matters as quickly as possible. Judgments cannot be reserved for more than 30 days. Recovery certificates must be expeditiously issued. One of the difficulties we were also having is in finding good presiding officers of both DRTs and appellate tribunals. So the age has also been relaxed a little in the present amendments. The second part of the amendment is with regard to the SARFAESI law, wherein the bank is empowered to take over the asset, which is the security, and once you take over the security, the debtor will start chasing the bank and come out with some sort of settlement. So the security can at least be protected. The security can be given to the asset reconstruction company, and that the asset reconstruction company will then transiently hold it till a new person can step it in and then revive the same asset. The idea is that the unit must go on and it must economically become more liquid, and the jobs are not lost in the whole process. Several honorable members have raised various questions. One of the questions which Shri Premachandran had again mentioned was with regard to agricultural land. The answer is farmers' agricultural land is exempted from securitization under section 31(1) of the Act itself. That is a question which remains outside the Securitization Act.